Welcome to White Pill Radio, the every other episode version of Theology on Air, which is an outgrowth of Theology by the Pint, which is a monthly gathering in Houston of theological, ethical, philosophical conversations around craft beer. I'm Evan McClanahan. I'm the pastor here at First Lutheran. Sarah Stone, the grand poobah of Theology by the Pint, she should be here, but she has family in town. She is entertaining them, having fun with them. We wish her well in that endeavor, but she is missed, so we'll have to be sure to say, if Sarah were here, she would say such and such. But this week, I am joined just by one other person, just by Ken Cowan.
Hi, I'm Ken. I'm an accountant, and I do numbers here at Theology by the Pint.
Yes, he's on the board for Theology by the Pint. It's a very important guy because he does all the finances. So if you make a donation to Theology by the Pint, which we encourage you to do, and you can go to theologybythepint.com or .org to learn more, either one, that is. You can go learn how to donate and give to the cause. Ken will make sure that that money is gently and safely stewarded, and that you get a tax write-off if so required. And anyway, all of that, theologybythepint.org, check that out. Help out the ministry. The main way you can help out is subscribing, sharing this if you like what you hear, coming to the events. We always want more people at the events. We just had one on aliens/demons. Pretty interesting content the other night. And we have one on Christian nationalism coming up, for which we are going to do. We're going to have to do a podcast, like intro to that or after the fact conversation. I think you might be involved in that since Ken is our resident anarchist.
Fair,
okay, I didn't want to out you or something.
Christian anti-nationalist.
Gotcha.
So there we go.
Well, this is White Pill Radio, as I said. This is the every other episode version, which is post-apologetic, ultimately hopeful, applied theology that looks at news and current events from a Christian worldview. I like to say that this is not happy talk, but this is blessed talk. And actually, Ken and I were talking about that intro on like just before we started, and he said maybe we should break that down a little bit. So I said, sure, I'm game.
A little bit of meta.
Okay.
Why is this not happy talk, even though it's called White Pill Radio, Evan?
Well, it is blessed talk, but it's not happy talk because happy talk is superficial, meaningless talk that skirts around the issue and never really tells the truth. It's like pablum, you know what I'm saying? It's like noise that is not. It doesn't invite sufficient conflict to actually get to the heart of the problem and actually solve the problem. That's happy talk. So we're not that. We're blessed talk. So we actually deal with reality, but we also try to bring the gospel or the word of God, which may actually be the law. Like, so sometimes the law of God is, I'm not going to say it's good in the same way the gospel is good, but it might be the solution to the problem. In fact, generally, if you're talking about ethical problems, the law is the answer to that.
Okay.
You know, the law is the right categorical response. So that's why it's blessed talk. And I said we're post-apologetic.
What does that mean?
Well, I think you and I, as we were talking, we kind of gone through similar journeys where there was a time in our life where we were like really interested in like evidence for like defending Christian faith and like evidence for God's existence.
I was a big Ravi Zacharias fan. I was heartbroken when all the allegations came out after he died. That hit hard. Yeah. I was huge into William Lane Craig and like the cosmological Kalam argument and all that.
Several William Lane Craig books right behind you on that shelf there. Lots of stuff in the apologetic realm behind you. So I got more into presuppositional apologetics because my theology is more reformed. And if you've never heard
you're not a Presbyterian.
I'm not a Presbyterian. Yeah. No, I'm not. Well, I'm still sacramental. It's unusual for Lutherans. The Lutheran apologetic, Sarah and I did a review of a lecture at Linear Theological Library a while back by, name's escaping me. John Warwick Montgomery. Okay. Anyway, so Lutheran apologetics typically begins at the cross and kind of works its way out. So it kind of basically asserts with historical, metaphysical certainty that Jesus was who he was and he died on the cross and he was risen from the dead. So historical, evidential argument there. Not totally unlike, say, the William Lane Craig or Zacharias' approach of the world, but not really getting into the cosmological arguments and some of the philosophical things about design and things like that. But I think there's a fault even in applying things that you think are certain historically, because you still have the issue of creation, the possibility of miracles, and those questions can only be answered presuppositionally.
Did you ever read Cold Case Christianity by?
Well, we've had J. Warner Wallace on multiple times. Okay. Yes, and I actually have asked him about presuppositional apologetics, and he says, "Well, I'm open to it." But
starting from the cross,
he's coming back on soon too.
Really?
Mhm.
Cool. Starting from the cross is a really interesting, like when you get into history and
Yeah.
Josephus and start to work your way backwards. Like, okay, if this guy, Jesus, really did exist, then what about these other claims that he made about himself and others made about him?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I think all
I
the
like
evidence all the evidence belongs to God. All the evidence actually does point towards everything that we claim as Christians. I have no issue defending the miraculous or anything like that. But so the question is, well, if we have all the evidence, then why aren't things sort of changing in our direction? Well, because we're living in a culture that is fundamentally irrational. So you're trying to make rational arguments to people who are actually and spiritually opposed to God. So I kind of pithily say that, there's no argument you can take to a true believer that will convince them not to be a believer, and there's no argument you could take to an unbeliever that would convince them to become a believer, because I think arguments do have their place. And generally speaking, in the apologetics world, I think 90% of the people who buy books are Christians. There are very few unbelievers who are like, "Oh, please, like change my mind."
To be convinced,
yeah. Mostly Christians want to know why they're a Christian, and evidences are fine for that. I'm fine for it building up the faith, but we have to challenge the presuppositional opposition to faith. We have to, and we put the shoe on the other foot. That's the thing that presuppositional apologetics does best, which is that you take the unbeliever's worldview to its logical conclusion, which ends up in absurdity at every single level: moral absurdity, historical absurdity, physical, as in physics absurdity, etc.
So you mentioned the Christians' aversion to any arguments that would actually change their mind, and the non-Christians' aversion to theological evidence that would change their mind. As far as the first part, the Christians' aversion to evidence that would change their mind.
I wouldn't say aversion. I would say that belief is a spiritual matter. So that ultimately, the evidential arguments are largely like kind of rational, historical, logically based. And what I'm saying is, but that's not really what belief is. I'm not trying to be a pietist about it, but what I mean is that if you are a believer, like if you are indwelt with the Spirit of God,
you're not saved by a series of intellectual propositional statements. You're saved by a relationship with this, person that we also call God, who embodied the person of Jesus Christ. One of the things that frustrated me about what you said earlier, because I'd felt it in my own history, is there's not very much evidence that you could give a Christian that would sway their belief. And really would have called myself one of those Christians before I started reading, right? Because not only was I into William Lane Craig and Greg Koukl and Ravi Zacharias, I was also into Answers in Genesis and Ken Ham and young earth creationism, humans rode dinosaurs, in the time of Job. And I read Darwin, and that should have shaken my faith the way that so many young Christians, first who are told, either about inerrancy, every word in the Bible has to be true or none of it's true.
Yeah.
Or they're told about young earth creationism. It's like evolutionists are obviously atheists.
Yeah.
And then they're hit with a freight train by the real world, and they start finding out things and being swayed by evidence, and they just abandon their faith altogether. Yeah. And I thank God that I wasn't one of those people.
Right.
That I could be pushed and pulled by the evidence. But I think that is one thing that's lacking in Christendom is the ability to look at evidence and hold your beliefs with an open hand and let God put things in that hand that he wants to put there and take things out that you might be holding on too tightly to. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I do think we should be preparing. I mean, Greg Bahnsen is widely considered I'd say there's three major presuppositionalists of the 20th century. There was Van Til, who's the kind of author and creator of it in the 50s, professor at Westminster Seminary back in the day. Then Rushdoony, who's a very controversial figure, but he pushed presuppositional apologetics and was a student of Van Til's, and he pushed theonomy probably further than anyone. But then there was Greg Bahnsen, who died young, whose son is still alive, and who I interviewed on my radio show back in the day. But there are lots of YouTube stuff out there with Greg Bahnsen and stuff that he gives to high school and college students presuppositionally, saying, look, this is how you think about things. But what happens in the evidential world is not that the arguments are bad. It's not that the evidence are bad. It's just that we live in a post-truth world, and that's kind of my point. That's why I'm post-apologetic. We live in a post-truth world. We live in a post-reason world, and so the question is, well, how do we then communicate to that world. And so that's why you have things like creative apologetics, or if Austin Friedman here he'd be kicking me. That's not what it's called, but it's like, it's like the C.S. Lewis approach, or the Tolkien approach, or whoever, those guys. But at the end of the day, I think usually the best apologetic approach would be simply asking good questions, to an unbeliever. And so basically, just kind of, they want to say, well, how could you believe that someone could be risen from the dead? And I want to say, well, how do you account for anything? How do you account for creation itself? Evolution doesn't account for creation. It only accounts for diversity of species. So why don't we have a really fundamental conversation about like the nature of things? And that's what presuppositional, I think, does, where you can actually have a more fruitful conversation about origins. And I think what you'll find is that most unbelievers are very superficial in their unbelief.
Agreed.
It's like they end up saying really dumb things. Like if you just let them talk.
You know what I'm about to say next, though?
No.
Most Christians are probably really superficial in their belief. Yes. And if you just let them talk, they're probably going to say something really stupid.
So what we're going for here is what we, in all seriousness, want to do, like on this show and the other podcast episodes we do and with Theology on Air. We want to teach. We want to be a teaching ministry in the church to take things that next level. Most everyone here would disagree with me about presuppositional apologetics. People think it's like, a circle.
Begging the question.
And of course, actually, Greg Bonson talks about that a lot, because he talks about how, well, actually, when you talk about foundational issues, yes, you have to
beg some question.
Yes, some question has to be begged.
Yeah.
If
Why is anything correct other than rather than non-correct? Yeah.
Yeah. So constantly saying, you're begging the question. Well, no, actually, because we're talking about the presuppositional nature. The presuppositional nature
exist? Yes. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So like that would be a good question to ask an unbeliever, because they would fall all over themselves, because either way they go, they're screwed. Because if they say yes, truth exists.
Where does it come from?
Yes. Yeah. And if they say no, then you're saying, well, then why are we talking?
Then how do I know what you said is just true?
Exactly.
If you said no. Yeah.
And people like Frank Turek have actually, he's kind of popularized some of this kind of street level presuppositional things, which I'm glad for. But then in the next day, he says Calvinists are the biggest idiots of all time.
I think he's mean.
Yeah, like in his Ben Shapiro style back and forth with people, or what?
I think he lacks a humility.
Yeah.
Yeah. I loved him when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Absolutely loved him.
I hear you. Final word on this, which is that one of the things presuppositionalists will say is that there is no neutrality. Mm-hmm. And I think that is key to understand. And that's a big point that is going to come up, I think, at the Christian nationalism thing. And that's why one of the arguments is going to come from that presuppositional theonomic space, which is that everyone has a worldview, everyone has a religion, all politics in a sense is religious. So the idea that you can talk to an unbeliever, you can leave your presuppositions behind, like, for example, that the Bible is the word of God, or that God exists, even, or that Jesus is divine. You can just leave that over here on the shelf. You and this unbeliever, you're going to go off to some neutral island. We're going to call it Neutral Island. And you can just talk rationally. You can just be totally rational. You have emptied your mind of all of your presuppositions, and now you can just have a talk that is nothing but capital R rational and capital L logical.
Well, you'd be talking about nothing then, because you've emptied your mind of all of your presuppositions.
It cannot be done. So, and in God's world, there is not spiritual neutrality.
Okay, Romans 1.
Well, yeah. Romans 1 is a very key text. So there you go. Yeah. So we're post-apologetic in the sense that I'm not here trying to sort of make arguments, but often what we'll do is kind of point to what the other side is up to. So let's begin. You good with that? Is that good? Is that helpful?
That was neat. So you won't be hearing about the first mover concept ever on this program.
Well, I take it for granted.
I'm joking.
No, exactly though. But I take it. Well, of course, there's a first mover, So if you don't believe in a first mover, then tell me.
Sure. Yeah.
Like that's putting the shoe on the other foot.
Cool.
But this was a commercial that Apple put out about a week ago. There's lots of articles. This one is from deadline.com. And actually, they apologize for it. So this was a commercial. If you haven't seen it, I don't really have the ability to encode it. I mean, I could do it.
Can you put a link in the doobly-doo at the bottom of the
I will
YouTube?
I will definitely put that link in the comments. But if you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. Just Google iPad Crush. They are touting the thinnest iPad ever. And in the commercial, you have a gigantic hydraulic press. And inside this press are beautiful, wonderful things.
Guitars and
metronomes and a piano and paint cans and an arcade and a trumpet and a sculpture. Yes, not a sculptor, a sculpture, and all these things, and this hydraulic press just crushes all of it. Toys, all kinds of things that, you know, sort of give you joy and have good memories attached to them. And then, of course, at the end, when the hydraulic press goes up, there's nothing but the iPad. The idea being, oh, we can take all of this stuff and just put it in this little box for you. This thin, when it's so thin, it's like, I don't know how much thinner they really need to get. I mean, here I am with my Mac, and I am a Mac person too. But this ad, if you've ever seen the 1984 Macintosh ad, directed by Ridley Scott, widely considered like the best commercial of all time, and this might be the worst of all time. It is so depressing. It is so dark. And I wonder if it's like a window into how the tech overlords, you know, think of us. You know, like they take all these cherished things, these tactile things, trumpets and instruments and toys, and they're just like, you will not need them anymore. You know, like you can do all things with my supercomputer, you know. And it was so widely panned by, and for example, Justine Bateman. Do you remember? You're probably too young for her.
I'm way too young.
She was on, like, what was that show with Michael J. Fox where he's the Republican? Some people are screaming at the...
I might be too young for that show too.
Michael J. Fox, he was not All in the Family. Family Ties. Anyway, she was his sister. But she's kind of grown up to be this like outspoken opponent to like AI. So she tweets back at Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, and is like, what is wrong with you? Like, this was the reaction that people had, like, something is wrong here. This is like, there's something, I would say, kind of demonic about it, because it's like robbing us of humanity and like forcing us into the Borg, like forcing it, Star Trek reference, I'm not a Trekkie, but like forcing us to conform to like these technological devices. And all it has made me do is think, wow, I spend too much time with computers, you know?
So I'm a little bit conflicted because what we're doing right now
on a Mac,
with a Sony, mirrorless camera on a free Audacity DAW program, broadcasting to YouTube. This is art that like we probably couldn't do, any time in the last 100 years. And if it was in the last 20 years, it'd be like terrestrial radio.
Right.
And when it, you just get whoever tunes in, hopefully they're listening.
Yeah.
So
you're a musician, right?
I'm a musician. In fact, I'm really torn by this because I love digital instruments.
Yeah.
I just bought, it's the coolest thing ever. It's a, I got it used, so I got a really good deal on it. It is a digital MIDI guitar. So it plays like a regular guitar, but each individual pickup, it's hexaphonic. So you send each signal out to a coder that gives it a MIDI pitch signal. And you can, just like you're playing a MIDI piano into a DAW, you can play this guitar and every note is tracked. And you can instantly turn it into a saxophone or a cello or a piano. And it's really, really cool. And I get that vibe from this ad, like being able to build a 3D sculpture in a software modeling program. It is just so tone deaf to have a hydraulic press crushing it it's so tone deaf.
Sucking the life out of everything we hold dear.
Because I agree with the principle. There are so many cool things you can do in the digital environment artistically that you would never be able to do before. And I feel like that's what they're trying to go for here.
Oh, for sure. They're trying to, I mean,
but man, it's tone deaf.
Hey guys, Sarah Stone here. Sorry to interrupt what I'm sure is a riveting podcast episode, but Theology by the Pint needs your help to continue providing these podcasts, offering our in-person events, and growing so we can bring thoughtful conversation and the hope of the gospel to a world that's increasingly walking away from church and from faith. Now that we're a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations are tax deductible, so we've crunched the numbers, and if each listener of this episode gave just $1 for each episode you listen to, we'd put a huge dent in our annual budget. So consider giving today. Go to theologybythepint.org/give and click the link to donate. Thanks so much, and now back to our show.
I mean, I don't know how dozens, if not hundreds of people work on this thing, look at it. I mean, it's produced by, I'm sure an ad company, outsourced by Apple. But people within Apple look at this and they say, who are we as a company? What do we want to represent? And like, you want to represent crushing
art,
yeah. And like, but I really, I mean, this does tie into a lot of, when I think about kind of modernity, and when I think about things like corporate worship, when I think about beautiful memories, I think about the world, my kids are inhabiting, and it's like less and less personal.
Mhm.
It's less and less tactile. It's less and less people involved. That's why my kids have learned piano since they could talk. And they have a big recital on Sunday, and they're going to be playing Bach and Chopin, and it's going to be in Grieg, and it's going to be wonderful. But we had to pay for that. We had to say, you're not going to quit. You got to practice, because that tactile, like that thing of like being a human and producing something with an instrument that is cranky and out of tune, and a couple of the keys don't work. Like that struggle is like important,
I agree.
And like my son plays baseball, and he plays pretty high level, and it's hard. I mean, kids throw 75 miles an hour when they're 13. It's ridiculous, It's hard. It's hard work, It's challenging. Like but we make our kids do that, Or my daughter does scouting and camping. And she's not a natural camper, but it's like you got to do the hard things. And it's like, I wonder, does big tech really just want us to, put on the Oculus goggles? The Apple $3,500 one seems to have bombed, by the way. You never hear about that.
Yeah. I'm going to have a counterpoint.
Yep.
Because
that's why you're here.
Yeah. I am a techno optimist with a major, major caveat. I do think it's going to create a giant gap between like the creators and the consumers. I think it's going to create a giant gap between the learners and the just like brain rot doom scrolling.
Yeah.
Because everything you're mentioning right now, like physical tactile pianos, I learned how to play upright bass just in the last like 3 years.
Really?
Like upright jazz bass. Again, got it used. It was super cheap. I'm always hunting for cheap musical instruments.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. And I learned it on YouTube. I learned it. See, there you go.
Yep,
I learned it from technology, right?
Yeah.
And I would have had to pay for, like, it's way more expensive than piano lessons to learn any of the string instruments like cello, especially when you're older than, high school, right? I don't get it for free by going to school anymore. I learned how to install mini split air conditioners by watching YouTube, right? The tactile things that I've learned how to do, I probably would not have known how to do in the past. And technology has increased my ability to do tactile things. However, the caveat is it comes with the people that choose not to do that, the doom scrollers. My brother was a public school teacher. Now he teaches at Houston Christian. When he taught public school, it was, you've heard the crabs in a bucket analogy? How crabs in a bucket don't need a lid. Because when you put crabs in a bucket and a couple of them try to climb out, the other crabs trying to climb out will grab at the legs and the base of the crabs and pull them back down. So as they're all trying to climb out, they're all pulling each other back down. Crabs in a bucket don't need a lid.
Okay.
And crabs in a bucket is so what technology is like and what high school is like. It's getting harder and harder and harder for these teachers to teach the kids in this, mega ADHD, immediate gratification, TikTokification of entertainment. In the meantime, there are the few exceptions that listen to like a 4-hour Joe Rogan podcast on like psilocybin mushrooms and foraging and the people that go on, what's the place where you can listen to like Harvard lectures for free? Not Skillshare, something like that. Where you can learn like really, really high level stuff for free. Audiobooks are one of the greatest things to ever happen. And so few people are accessing those resources, but it's such a better world for those people that do.
Yeah. No, I hear you. No, I mean, I don't want to be like a techno, like, cynic or something like that. I mean, I think there are good things that come from it. I just think we need to like balance it, and what Apple, if this commercial kind of highlighted, was they did take all those tactile things and they did kind of reduce it to just, like a conforming to their way of doing things. And it's like, so like, let's say you play the trumpet and you want to record it. Well, an iPad is a great device for that. You know, actually, I hate iPads. I hate them. I love my iPhone and I love my laptop. I hate iPads.
GarageBand not good on iPad? It's good on Mac.
No, I just don't like iPads. Like they're too big to be like to text with, you know?
Yeah,
and they're too small to, anyway.
Yeah.
I want my keyboard. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, so yeah, if you want to record your trumpet playing into your iPad, makes sense. But I don't want, but I want my kids, for example, to learn how to make a sound out of a trumpet. You know what I'm saying? Like not a digital version, which is so good I can't tell the difference. Like we had a fire at our church 2011. We got money for a new organ. And we actually had debates like, well, do we get a digital organ? Because they're so good, you can basically not tell. Like they even have the chiff sound of like where the stop opens on the pipe, so the air, you know, it's like the sampling is so good, you almost probably can't tell. But we said, no, we want a pipe organ because the actual acoustic way the sound is in the air is fundamentally different. It comes from a pipe, not a speaker. It supports the human voice, and it's so fundamentally different, and we wanted to support singing. We paid more money for less diversity of sound with a pipe organ. So
yeah, and sometimes, like, lower tech breeds more creativity, right? You do get creativity from limitations. I totally understand that. On the other hand, right, technology opening up the world, similar to the organ, AI has made, like, this SM7B pod, you know, the quintessential podcast mic.
That's why I gave it to you.
It's made it obsolete because AI can take really garbage, like microphones.
Yeah.
You throw 20 minutes of podcast into like from a garbage microphone into an AI. I think it's Adobe has their AI system, and it'll sound perfect, right? And the gap between cheap physical stuff and like the really, really high end is getting closer and closer together.
I hear you.
It's
but
fun.
I need at least one of those mics because I have like some magnetic field in this room. And like anyway, like these mics don't cut it out. But anyway, that's a story for another day. Since you're the accountant at Theology by the Pint, in case there's an extra $400 laying around, or if you want to give to the mic fund, Theology by the Pint.
You want another SMB7 or 7B?
No, I do. I want another one of those and to start replacing these lovely SM58s that are good, but like I said, they don't block out certain magnetic fields. Let's talk about the next story. Imports. Okay, tariffs. Biden is getting all populist. He's pulling a Trump-esque move, I would argue, and he's anyway, introduce the article. Then let's kind of take a step back and tell people why this matters.
So Biden has said, "I'll see your steel tariffs from China, and I'll match it." He's gone all in on the tariff poker. But CNN Politics: Biden increases tariffs on $18 billion in Chinese imports. From a new warning that he made to Beijing. This is going to include steel. It's going to include semiconductors, solar components. It's going to include, I think it was like silicon, aluminum. He's really, really going all in on the trade war with China. Now, Evan asked me a question earlier. Well, why does this matter, right? Like, compared to some of the other stories that we talk about, which are abortion or, you know, like a Satanist builds a Baphomet sculpture in City Hall and like compares it to the Ten Commandments sculpture.
Or did you see King Charles's new portrait?
No, I haven't. What is it?
Oh man, well it's really
weird?
creepy and weird.
That's weird?
It's all red, and if you do a mirror image and you kind of darken a hue, people swear like there's a Baphomet right in the middle.
See, that's the stuff we normally talk about on this podcast.
But it's so visual. But yeah, it's just alone without the Baphomet and without the mirrored image thing. It's highly disturbing. But
so
go ahead.
Why do things like tariffs or immigration or even like crime, like why does that matter in this? And I would say that economics is just a couple steps removed, like trade wars are just a couple steps removed from actual war.
Yep.
You're using physical force to prevent somebody from interacting with somebody else that they want to interact with. Right? So you, on another peek behind the curtain, we have a group text.
Oh, yeah.
And we kind of got into it on the group text about, like, why are tariffs good? I don't think they are. Some people do think they are. Why is that?
Well, let's take a little bit of a step back, too. So you would say, like, economically, like, you would call yourself a libertarian or
anarchist, but
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. There's some overlap there.
There's
I mean,
a lot of
in
overlap
each
there, yeah.
case, it's either no or very limited government. And
Sure.
so as a consequence of that, you would say, let's have free trade. The market more or less regulates itself, not only domestically, but internationally as well. I mean, I probably used to be in that camp, and maybe to a degree I still am. When I was in college, they teach you about the law of comparative advantage.
Sure.
It's one of the fundamental reasons that you have international trade, because Panama can grow bananas more cheaply than we can, but we make air conditioners, so we sell our air conditioners to them, and they sell our bananas to us, and everyone is better off. So I would argue that really the success of like Milton Friedman, in the 60s, 70s, and really 80s, he was very influential on Reagan and various policies. And that is trickle down economics. That really the idea was, hey, open things up. Libertarian economic philosophy, I would say, won. Open things up, free trade. It's better to.
Are you kidding me?
No, you
Okay.
don't think so?
I think
I'll
push back on that, but okay.
Okay, well, what I mean is that.
Yeah, what do you mean by libertarian economics one?
Well, I mean that America was a lot less protective of its own industry, its own workers, and it opened. And look, let's put it simply: China manufactures almost everything that we buy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we used to manufacture a lot of that stuff.
Sure.
So why? Because that was the deal we made. We basically said we'll use Chinese, I would argue, slave labor. And at a time when, by the way, we should have used that as we should have allowed the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, to be killed at the Tiananmen Square revolt in 1992, because it's not a government, it's not a legitimate government, it's a criminal enterprise, it's a mafia, it's run by the richest people on earth, but so they don't play fair, they steal our technology. There's a lot of reasons not to do business with the CCP, but and so we should have allowed them to be overthrown in 92, but instead we go in as Americans, say, tell you what. You make the refrigerators and the TVs and the million other things that you make, the bicycles, that you name it, they make it. And we'll open things up, and it'll be better for us because we can get that product for 10%
Cheaper.
less cheaper.
That's the Miltonian argument. Yeah.
Yeah. So, which is good for the consumer, because my TV costs less, my refrigerator costs less. But what happens to, this is how Trump won in 2016. Middle America got hollowed out. Middle America became, unfortunately, the Packard factory, automotive, that's not related. Well, it's kind of related. Detroit, they don't make many cars in Detroit anymore. They don't make all kinds of little products, widgets. And with that, a lot of our intellectual property. There's only one company on earth that makes cassette tape players anymore,
Okay.
It's in Taiwan. Little things like that. There's all this like IP that we've sort of lost. We don't know how to make things anymore. We don't have the dyes, DYES, to make a lot of manufacturing products anymore. And it's hurt a lot of communities. It's hurt, and so I think when you look at, so drug abuse, and this is what like hillbilly LG's and largely
Deaths
about.
of despair.
Yes.
Yeah.
And which is why J.D. Vance, I think, should be Trump's VP pick. But anyway.
Ooh, that's a hot take.
Yeah, for sure. But so the big picture, and why does this matter? I mean, I think hopefully you see it matters in the way that I just described, because so there is a cost to letting other people make your goods more cheaply.
Sure. You're saying a steel mill shuts down in Appalachia.
Yes.
Now, what happens to all the Rust Belt workers there?
Yes. Or clothing manufacturing. I mean, my goodness. I mean, the East Coast had massive shipbuilding capability, clothing manufacturing, all that. So yeah, what happens?
Well, my alternative, hypothetical to you is like, okay, well, what if instead of steel mill that is running a town's like economic engine, what if it's a typewriter factory, right? Like, do you really like grit your teeth and have heartburn about a typewriter factory going out of business?
I just had this whole thing about the need for tactile. So yes, we need to bring typewriters back. And not the electronic typewriters, like the ones I learned. I mean, you got to push hard to get like the ink on the page. No, I'm kidding. I was going to say
the Unabomber. He wrote this manifesto.
It's like the buggy whip, the horse buggy.
The horse and buggy industry.
Yes.
Yeah.
With capitalism comes, creative destruction, and I think that by definition, progress, technological innovation is inescapable. I mean, I'm not a Luddite.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
However, and it's kind of hard to say because it's like. Because I kind of like benefit from some tech, and I'm like, well, that tech is good, but the next thing
I was going to ask,
yeah.
What's your limiting principle? Like, where do you draw the line? And
no humanoid robots.
No humanoid. That's your limiting principle. It's like when they start to replace. I use Microsoft and Excel all day, right?
Yeah.
And 50 years ago, ledgers were done like on, ledger paper. Right. Every accountant that I've ever met like is not going to know what to do with ledger paper if they saw it. Heck, I wouldn't even know what to do with it if I saw it.
You're going to need to know, because in the zombie apocalypse, how are you going to apportion ammunition to
an
the
abacus,
people?
like you have like a little slide. But what I'm saying is like I use Excel to do the job that would have taken a team of accountants to do, and I can do it in an afternoon.
Right.
It's
the same arguments with AI, like, because they can create. I've said this before on the show. I think AI is going to kind of flame out, because I think it's going to produce something almost as good, but it's not ever going to cross the uncanny valley. Like, people are like, cartoons are always like, non-real people are always going to never look quite real. You know what I mean? Like, and scripts are never going to be quite as good. They're never going to be as creative. They're never going to be as unpredictable. Same with music. Same with
I would say for the arts, yes, but not for STEM. STEM is where AI gets really, really interesting, because, again, I'm going to shout out to John, my brother. You might see him at the next Theology by the Pint. He likes to come to these things now. He was a math teacher for public school. Now he's a math teacher at HCU. And he'll make these, for geometry or trigonometry, he'll make these equations that, you had to go and look in a textbook to find equations that would have a perfect round number answer. So if you have like a trigonometry question and, you're trying to find like the parts of a triangle or the sine or cosine or whatever, if you just plug random numbers into your question, you're going to get a answer with like repeating decimals, and it's going to be a non-perfect answer. But like, what you can do is you can throw any number of questions into ChatGPT and say, hey, build me 20 questions where the number is a nice round number, and it spits them out, and they're never wrong. I get they have hallucinations, especially with like matters
Explain what that is, though.
Hallucinations in AI are, especially in matters of like history or fact, if you press it enough, it will try to answer what you want it to answer rather than answering with the information that it has. So it will invent authors for research papers that don't exist, or it'll it'll cite your sources for a research paper to an author that really exists on the subject that really exists, but with a journal publication that he never wrote, right? It sounds like something he wrote.
Well, like lawyers are submitting things to courts with false cases. The AI creates a case to prove the point.
So that's a hallucination. And in matters of history and in matters of literature or journalistic fact, yes, you've got to double check your work with that sort of thing. But STEM, tech, mathematics, engineering,
okay,
it's getting really, really good and is already light years better than any human.
Yeah. Okay. I hear you on all that. I've taught, whenever we talk, to make it kind of full circle, but presuppositional apologetics, one of the things about presup apologetics is that, you deal with the reality that everyone has a worldview. Okay. And that sort of drives everything, et cetera. And so that's kind of where the conversation needs to be. Does AI have a worldview? I know people don't like the word worldview, and it's kind of overused. I got that. But I would say yes. It has to, because it's created by people.
The worldview of its programmers.
Yeah.
I would say probably the worldview of its programmers, certainly, because it's going to put parameters around what it reads, but it's also going to have the worldview of the stuff that it reads, right? Because
for sure.
What AI is, it's trained.
Yeah.
It's a model that's trained on information. And GPT-4 is just trained on as much information as it can find.
Yeah.
And it's going to be trained on the information that it can find. Do you remember, I think it was around 2012, Tay AI? Microsoft tried to build an AI chatbot, right? And what they did...
Was this the paperclip in Microsoft Word?
Clippy? No, that's way older.
that was a joke. Okay, go ahead.
It's hilarious. No, it was Tay. It was an AI chatbot. It had it was supposed to resemble like a high school girl that's gonna into texting and hey, that's lit, or whatever kids were saying back in 2012, 2013.
I think they were saying fat. PHAT.
And PHAT. It was the early aughts. Yeah. And they released it to the internet.
Yeah.
To just scoop as much data as it could find. And the internet wasn't as robust as it was back then. And the chatbot learning modeling programs were not as good at filtering out noise and actually targeting what you're trying to find as they are today. So this thing found 4chan. And it's 12 hours, this thing was making Nazi jokes and 9/11 jokes, and Microsoft had to pull the plug on AI.
That's
it's
hysterical.
hilarious.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's trained on the culture. You said
Right.
this would have a worldview.
Right.
Yes, it's the worldview of whoever's programming it, but you let this thing loose into the internet, it's going to have the worldview of whatever it finds.
Right. Well, for example,
Yeah.
that's why, like, it maybe this was an older version of ChatGPT, but it was like, tell me something good about black people, and it would list all the virtues of blacks, and you would black people. Sorry. Same with white people. I'm sorry, I can't do that. My program is so those kinds of issues were like, oh, well, that's or same with women and men. You know, so basically, men bad, women good, etc.
You say, tell me a joke about men, and it'll have like, oh, my
1,000
husband
jokes at
doesn't
men's
do the
expense.
laundry,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
it's like, tell me a joke about women. I'm sorry, I can't do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So the bringing it back to tariffs and things.
Sure.
The point was that there are advances and changes in civilization. We have to kind of roll with it. The question. So, but you asked me a question of like, what is the limiting principle? Let me give you a pithy kind of cliche. But if I were, say, in the president's, cabinet or something, and he had my ear, I would say, look, we're a nation with an economy, not an economy with a nation. I think the libertarian approach basically says, hey, there is this all good economy, and that is the most important thing, and it serves the nation. It's like, or rather, the nation serves it. And so I would say, no, that's inverted. We're a nation. Who are we as a nation? What are our principles? What are our core values? One of them is equality, but equality and the ability to get wealthy, but wealth is not actually one of our core values. I would say, for example. So I think thinking economically first, say, puts the creation of wealth at too high of a priority, and I would say so. It's hard to say exactly where to draw the line, but I would say, for example, when the steel industry was hurting because China can produce steel at half the price and it's cheaper for them to, make it there and ship it over here. Same with EVs, by the way. There's a Chinese EV that they say they can sell in America for $12,000. When a Tesla is 30 to 40 or 50. And so they're gonna, there's a major issue. People think that's just going to totally collapse the EV market and all of that coming. But so the question is, it's better for the producer if steel is cheaper. But what's going to happen to the steel industry?
Producer or consumer, you mean?
Consumer. It's better for the consumer if steel is cheaper, because then all the goods that you steal are going to be cheaper. Okay, gotcha.
You're saying what's going to happen to the steel economy?
Right.
Well, it's naturally going to put pressure onto the steel industry.
Right.
So they will either have to lay off a bunch of workers,
okay, but let's
automate, or go ahead.
Well, okay, so you say, okay, well, no big deal. I mean, so steel is the horse and buggy; it just goes out. Yeah, well, what if we need steel? And what if the only people making it are people that we're at a trade war with, or an actual war with, like China?
So
what then?
I would ask: does the comparative advantage of trade in the short to long term with China outweigh the pain period that we're going to have if they immediately decide to shut it off? Now, people will say, and I hear this a lot in the Republican Trumpists and not so much the Bernie Sanders types, but the protectionists would say, well, they manipulate their currency, right?
Yeah.
China manipulates their currency to sell us cheap goods.
Yeah, we would never do that. Go ahead.
Well, okay, there's that.
Okay.
But the complaint always circles back to the goods are too cheap, right? We have to put tariffs on them, which are just taxes on consumers, right? To benefit producers. You're taxing consumers to benefit producers. So it is a wealth transfer from like a Marxist perspective. It's a wealth transfer from the consumers, which would be the proletariat, to the producers, which are going to be the capitalists.
Right.
So there is that. It's not just the poor working man.
It's not value neutral
in Appalachia, but it's always a criticism of these artificially low prices are bad for America. And it's like, well, what's the limiting principle on that? If it's 50% lower than we could produce, then it's 50% cheaper for us to consume, which is a net good for the consumers. It's a slight pain point for the producers. They're going to have to learn to make something else. What if they sold it to us 25% cheaper? What if they sold it to us not 25% cheaper, at 25% the price that we could produce it?
Right.
What if they sold it to us at 10% the price which you know where I'm going with this?
Yes. At some point,
what if they gave it to us for free? How could you possibly say that's bad for our economy?
Yeah. Well, I would say think about something like antibiotics.
Okay.
And maybe where I would go with this is that generally speaking, I'm for free trade and comparative advantage, but there are some industries that we need to keep in house because of the supply chain. And I think if COVID, and of course, I think our response to COVID was ridiculous, but I think if that showed us anything, it's how fragile the supply chains are. It took them years to recover from a 15-day shutdown. But things like we don't even make antibiotics. We don't even make vitamin C in this country anymore. We got to the point where it's like, well, China can make everything cheaper. And so that by that logic, they basically make everything. I mean, I called a local bike shop and I was like, I want to buy my son a good bicycle. Mm-hmm. Who makes one in America? They're like, nobody. You want a $5,000 bike? There's somebody in America that makes that. But like nobody makes bicycles in America anymore. And I've done the same thing with other products. I did find a made in America garden sprinkler, like lawn sprinkler. So that was fine. And it was a reasonable price too, and high quality. But I think things like the supply chains of medicines, of war materials, military materials, like steel, like gunpowder. I mean, there's like, you start making a list of things like what are essential for the good of our nation. And those are the things that I would probably protect. You know what I'm saying? But let me tell a story a different way, which I used this example in a previous episode, but I actually think that some of the arguments of comparative advantage, we don't actually always know how it'll play out.
No, we don't.
So like, yes, China can make something cheaper today, maybe because they manipulate their currency. By the way, I don't think we manipulate our currency. We just print money, which debases our currency.
Right. Jerome Powell hates poor people.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. An example. There's a guy, Joel Salatin. He's kind of a famous a farmer out in like Virginia. And he wrote a book years ago called "Everything I Want to Do Is Illegal." So he's in many respects a libertarian.
I think I've read a version of that book.
You probably have.
Or is it like 3 felonies a day or something like
that? No, that was about 10 years ago. But very similar concept.
Yeah.
So Joel Salatin, he has beef and chickens and pork, and he does this kind of like rotational model. So everything's organic. The chickens scratch, and then the pigs poop, and the cow eats the grass, and blah blah. And it's just a beautiful cycle. But people buy his food products and they love him. It's all organic and no antibiotics, and he's trying to avoid government regulation, and which is totally out of control and all that. Okay, cool. So one day someone goes in 2-3 years ago when inflation was just still is, but it was getting crazy, and they said, I want like a ribeye or something, and he said, oh, I'm so sorry, my beef prices are really high, but it's because we make everything here and it's no antibiotic and it's organic and blah blah blah. And they said, oh, what do you charge per pound? And he's like, it's $13.99 a pound. And they're like, well, it's $18.99 a pound at the grocery store.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then he said, finally, it took 30 years, but now my model, okay, small farming, rotational model, organic, no antibiotics, no, very local supply chain, growing all my own this and growing my own that and all that is now working to create a cheaper product. Mm-hmm. So for example, Ukraine provides a lot of wheat to the world. Mm-hmm. So you cut off that supply, or natural gas. Russia supplies a lot of natural gas to the world. So you have these like global conflicts that now reduce a good from getting to the world market. That product goes up, the whole world is affected. But if we took our 1,000-acre corn fields or 1,000 or 5,000-acre soybean fields and we converted that into 100 local farms, a la Joel Salatin's model, it would be more expensive in the long run. So if you took out NGA foods and manipulated seed and the things that give us cheap food that is killing us, okay, and you produced wholesome food, locally sourced food, it would be more expensive.
Okay, manipulated seed and cheap food is killing us.
Yes.
All right, so finish your rant, but I want to circle back to that.
Okay, the point is that there would be pain in the long run because right now, even industrial food is on the model of comparative advantage.
Yeah.
Okay, our fertilizer comes from natural gas, so the natural gas, and everything is affected at this point. The supply chain around the world is so connected, and I'm saying we need to get off of that. The comparative advantage model it's not true. It's not wrong. As an economic theory, it's not wrong. But in the long run, I think the costs are going to be bigger. Because, for example, it's cheaper for us to make corn than anywhere else in the world. Mm-hmm. But the way we do it sucks. Mm-hmm. It's depleting the soil. The corn is terrible for us. It's full of crap that's making us all fat, I'm convinced. And so we need to go back to the way that we used to make food. So
I love that you mentioned corn because that's where I'm going next.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, no, I'm done. I mean, I just think, I don't agree that the comparative advantage and sort of the totally libertarian free market is it's not wrong. I just think that kind of protectionist, like that protectionist in me is coming out now in a way that it wouldn't have honestly pre-Trump, because he kind of challenged the way that I think about this sort of thing. But like when I start to apply it to other things, I'm like, no, I think that's right. I think some pain on the front end is going to happen, but in the long run, we will have an actually more sustainable supply chain, food system, manufacturing base, and I think that'll be better.
And when you say more sustainable, right? I'm
such a lefty all of a sudden.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Like you're a green, Greenpeace kind of guy
Crazy.
now. It's like everyone grow their own farms.
Yeah.
Monocrop agriculture is bad, which I agree.
Yeah.
Monocrop agriculture like leaches nitrogen out of the soil. You have to use the Fritz-Haber method to put it back in, which is a engineering genius. Fritz-Haber also responsible.
You must be an Aggie.
Say what?
Is he an Aggie?
No.
Oh, okay,
He was a German scientist.
Oh, okay.
That is, was...
Was that the soybean after the corn? Because the soybean puts the nitrogen back in, or what? Or is this fertilizer?
I think it was a method for fertilizer.
Okay.
He was simultaneously nominated for the Nobel Prize for like this wonderful way of injecting nitrogen back into the soil, and also being tried by The Hague for war crimes, because I think it was like mustard gas or something that he was responsible for making.
Oh, that guy. Yeah.
And so, it's crazy.
Yeah.
But anyways, yes, monocrop agriculture is bad, leaches nitrogen out of the soil. We do it with corn a lot. But how are the subsidies that we give to these corn farmers any different than a tariff, right? If we tariff China, right, that's just basically giving a subsidy to steel manufacturers, right?
Yeah.
It's giving a subsidy to aluminum manufacturers. If we tariff stuff that we don't produce, right? Silicon, there's not a lot of silicon mines in the US. There's definitely not a lot of cobalt mines in the US for lithium-ion batteries, which I believe are going to change the game to make us more independent, more localized. Again, I think I mentioned this in the last one. When I said ChatGPT, what we really, really, really need to be optimistic about is that it can help us build a better battery, right? Lithium ion's great, but it's not good for large, right? Like the little lithium ion batteries that are in like your camera or like your power tools. The first Teslas were just thousands of lithium ion batteries. It's a little bigger than a AA. They go into like a vape cartridge or whatever. Thousands of lithium ion batteries stacked in series parallel in the bottom of a car. Right, they've gotten a little better at making them a bit more dense, but lithium-ion batteries aren't really good for cars, and they're terrible for houses. Right, the Tesla house powering one. We could be so much more independent if we had solar and batteries, but right now we don't have the battery technology. Right, but if we had solar, the problem with solar is you can't store it.
Yeah.
Right, but if you could store that sucker, you'd be really good. Problem with the photovoltaic, silicon, and solar, you can't get all of that from the US. But you're talking about independence, and I'm saying accelerationist with the technology, accelerationist with all of the benefits that you get from free trade, and all of the benefits that you get from technology revolutions, one after another, when you invent better and better technologies. Those things help us become more independent, not more dependent. That's my white pill on this. Like, as you increase this thing, you're going to have short-term pain for very specific sectors. And honestly, for hillbilly elegy, like those are people that just didn't move. People move when the wildebeest go, if you want to go all Unabomber on this, right? When the wildebeest moved, or when the ice age came through and like Northern Europe was no longer farmable, you had to move south. But like, people do that all the time. Why would we not expect anyone in a manufacturing town to not move?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, people would say, well, my family is, buried here, and, this is where I grew up, and, people have sentimental attachments. And I agree. People are not always as victimized as maybe they would want to portray. I mean, sometimes people make poor choices in life. And by the way, I'm not for tariffs on, or subsidies for corn. I'm not for subsidies for EVs either. It's like
me neither, but
I mean, it's like it used to. It's like, here, buy a Prius. The government will pay for $15,000. What? My taxes.
That's a tax credit to rich people. Because how many low income people are buying Priuses?
Exactly. And, and now that's starting to fade out, and so fewer people. That's why the stocks for Tesla are so bad. In part because fewer people are like, I'm not going to buy that. And people, it's like hard to do a road trip, but that's a whole other thing. But I don't know. Politically, I think that Biden is trying to present himself as some kind of version of America first. And that's, I think, actually what I would probably say that tariffs maybe are a better threat than a policy, depending on the product, and things like that. I think you should prioritize certain products for your own, nation's well-being. But the bigger picture is, I think, you should put your nation's needs first. And I think one of the major political and cultural moments we're in right now is that this is the debate of the day. I mean, it's what MAGA is claiming, is that you are the forgotten people. Your government hates you. The corporations are internationalists. No one speaks for you. They don't care if you're flyover country. They don't care if your town hollows out,
and I think that's what Trump tapped into. Yes, he used economic populism because everyone uses economic populism. That always works, and it frustrates me to no end.
Yeah.
But I really think it's what you said about flyover country, right? The coastal elites hate Trump, and what he was able to do was he would say, they hate me because they hate you.
Yeah.
I am a avatar for all of your beliefs, which is crazy considering that he won the evangelical vote, a guy who's currently in trial for the Stormy Daniels stuff.
Doing less than moral activities, supposedly, allegedly.
A New York billionaire with gold toilet seats is supposed to represent the everyman. Anyways, there's that. But he was very, very convincing at saying they hate you. They hate the flyover country. And they're projecting that onto me.
But I think they really do hate them.
I think they do too.
That's the thing. I mean, I think they're actually, he's not wrong. And so, he's a bizarre messenger for that message.
I just have no idea why it worked. I have no idea why that message worked.
Well, I think it worked because
why do people say, oh, I could be like him? No, he's nothing like you, right? Why did that work with regular people?
Because, the Bushes of the world, who are supposed to kind of support the, and represent the normal person and the values of people like me, we just kind of said, oh, okay, another Middle East war. I mean, I guess that's just the way it has to be. And Trump said, no, it doesn't have to be that way. I was like, what? I mean, he humiliated Jeb Bush on stage, humiliated him. And a good friend of mine who used to be a very active, Democrat, active almost ran for office, And he was like, that was the moment I became pro-Trump. Because I hate the Bushes, and I was sitting there going, but I have to like the Bushes because he's a Republican and he's from Texas. So
have you seen Shane Gillis?
No,
that comedian. He's got a hilarious bit about the debates when he humiliated Jeb.
Yeah,
and it's like you have the senator from Florida. Oh, I support religion. Oh, that's pretty good.
Yeah,
and he goes the senator from Georgia. Oh, I support education. Okay, this guy's good. Rand Paul has 1%. He's ugly. Jeb Bush is low energy. And it's like, oh, we didn't know you could do that in a debate.
Right.
Shane Gillis has a hilarious stand-up comedy bit about how Trump changed debates by attacking uptight politicians who got bullied in school. And now that bully's back and he's on stage yelling at them.
Well,
it changed a lot of people's minds.
Speaking of tariffs, the bigger issue with the tariff, is that in case you're out there listening, why are they talking about this? This is so obscure. Okay, there is a tariff is a weapon, I would say, to fight kind of the system. The system favors the rich, and 5 years ago, I never would have said something like that. But there is a system. The Federal Reserve is a part of the system, the banking, which is a banking cartel. The war machine is part of the system. Wall Street is part of the system. There's aspects of the system that are fundamentally opposed to the common person, the average person, making a good living, setting aside something. And, in the old days, a guy could, work as a, putting telephone lines up or something. Blue collar job, could have 5 kids, could put them through parochial school.
China's not putting our telephone lines up.
No, I'm saying
those jobs are still available.
No, I know. And actually, they're pretty good paying jobs.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. Right? The people that used to work in these, steel mills, right? We have labor jobs that are still available that could still be done. Yeah. China's not going to be building houses. They're not going to be framing 2x4s.
No, but they're
not going to be sheetrocking.
Well, no, but all the 2x4s will come from China. But and by the way, they're 1 3/4 by 3.5. But who's counting?
Yep.
I think that people kind of feel more or less forgotten. I think that's the bottom line.
I agree.
And especially someone like Clinton, with the Clinton Foundation, and I think people feel like, wow, I mean, when Hillary Clinton calls, middle America a basket of deplorables, I think people we're like, oh, that's what they really think of us.
Mhm.
You know, this is a cabal sort of against us. They're actually not for us, and everything they say reflects that.
And so to bring it to the spiritual, the theology aspect of the trade wars, I do think, and I know you're not really a Greg Boyd fan, but I do think it's kind of the us versus them,
Mhm.
right? Trade wars, I know you're talking about systems, but trade wars put a very specific enemy, right? China, right? You know,
Yeah.
like it points to an enemy and says, they're the reason you're poor,
Yeah.
right? Which is one of the most like anti-Christ things I can think of. There are certainly people or systems that are the reason that we're poor. But like to capitalize on that and to use that to make your way into like a political power when you know it's going to hurt the consumer, I think is one of the most like anti-Christ way of thinking about it. Not to say that Christ has economic policies.
I understand.
But to say that demonization of like any people or people group or nation or specific, like that's not really the way of Jesus.
Yeah.
In fact, it's the tribalism that, you know, kind of separated Judea and Samaria. And Jesus is like, no, the Samaritan, right?
Yeah.
He's your neighbor.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's the theology part of it.
No, good thought. Maybe time for one more or two quick articles. I actually think this dovetails pretty well. This is actually just a tweet. I mean, there are lots of articles about both of these cases, but near the U.S. Capitol, there's an 18-year-old young man who was recently released on bail by a supposedly woke, self-described apparently woke judge after he fired an AR-15 26 times at a car full of people. So 18-year-old AR-15, apparently that stands for assault rifle, right?
No, Armalite.
I know.
I'm joking. Okay.
But yes, AR does not stand for, that was unfair. Armalite 15. Anyway, so he fires 26 at a car full of people. You would think that's like attempted murder, like 26 times, like jail for life, throw away the key, right? No, he's released. No, okay, he's on house arrest or something to this effect. But okay, meanwhile, to just contrast, and this is the way I think people feel like they are, you know, so disrespected by the government. 62-year-old Heather Idoni, who is arrested for protesting at an abortion clinic in Washington, D.C. in violation of the FACE Act, has been remanded to prison until her sentencing. So she hasn't even been fully sentenced, but she's got to go to prison anyway. There's a grandmother with 15 grandkids, a pro-life advocate. The FACE, in case you never heard of the FACE Act, it's something about clinic entrance. So basically, you cannot prevent people from entering an abortion clinic, or I think maybe other medical clinics, but the only people protest it. This was a strategy, the 80s, that kind of went the way of the dodo bird after this
Nobody's
act.
protesting like liver cancer.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, sure, go to MD Anderson and get cured of cancer.
Nobody's protesting that. Yeah.
But people do try to physically stop people from going in an abortion clinic, which usually they go around, into the back door or something because they can't circle the entire building. But, they might sit down or something, and these people are going to prison for like years and years. And so there's this not just double standard, not just hypocrisy, but just this rank feeling. Like if you're actually fighting for the good, you're a criminal. But if you shoot a high-powered rifle, into a car 26 times, nobody cares.
I wouldn't say no one cares. Like
I know.
I do think this is more of a conversation about bail and less of a conversation about like, oh, we're allowing criminals to walk free and we're like throwing grandmothers in prison.
Yeah.
I think she wasn't able to make bail, and like he probably got a bail bond or something.
Yeah.
That it's usually how it works. And then when people look at the financial, stupidness of taking a bail bond,
but like a judge doesn't have to assign bail.
They don't have to. Right.
I mean, like
right,
it gets into like things like flight risk and
or a danger. Right?
Danger. Like she's trying to save lives.
Which this kid like obviously was a danger.
Yeah.
And I think probably should have gotten no bail. Yeah. But bail's so messed up in and hold on, doesn't Washington D.C. have some of the strictest gun laws in the United States?
Yeah.
How was he able to get?
Yeah, you're pro 2A, right? I mean,
no,
anarchists.
I can't stand the 2A.
Oh,
I'm more of a Marx guy.
Oh, right? Oh, I thought you were like a libertarian.
Oh no,
or anarchist or something.
Here's Marx's quote.
Okay,
the right of the people. Sorry. So 2A is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Yeah. Marx's quote is, under no pretext shall arms or ammunitions be surrendered the right of the proletariat, right? So he goes even further than 2A.
Oh,
he's like,
okay. You're saying the 2A is not enough.
That's what I'm saying.
On that one.
That's what I'm saying. That's for your Armalite thing.
You're probably even pro assault rifle. Anyway,
I am pro 3D printing. I think.
Okay. Hang on. Are you pro cannon? In Texas, you have to be.
Come and take it.
Hello.
I mean, come on, dude.
Okay. How about pro nuclear, pro small nuclear dirty bomb? You know what I'm saying? I mean, if they can have one, you don't have to answer that. But go ahead.
What I'm
3D printing. Yeah.
Well, yeah. What I'm saying is like, and I'm not even saying that I own any firearms.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome to come to my house and find out. But
2:00 this morning. Go ahead.
But what I am saying is that like I don't think that these restrictions on firearms do any good because clearly only the criminals get firearms. And
talk about logic as a matter of logic. Yeah.
And also what it does is it prevents people that live in these really, really poor, really, really high crime communities. It leaves the honest people that live there no ability to protect themselves.
Well, that's a topic. I think I've suggested it, that we talk about with Theology by the Pint, like
And I'm
self-defense.
Because I'm a pacifist. I am crazy. I'm anti-war. Generally pretty anti-cop. The way I think about it is Jesus tells Peter to put down his sword, right? I don't think any Christian could make an argument that Jesus would point to the Romans and say, hey, you, Jews, give to the Romans your denarii so that he can take away the swords from your neighbors. Yeah. Right. And so that the Romans can be the only ones with the swords. Right. Yeah. That's something Jesus would never have said.
Yeah.
But all of the who's that really annoying? I can't remember his name, but the really, really anti-gun Christian. I'll put it in the chat.
John Piper?
No. Was John Piper anti-gun?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there's an article
Shane Claiborne.
Oh, I just unfollowed him on Twitter. I couldn't take it anymore.
He is nauseatingly anti-gun to the point of like, you just got to ask him like, yo, what's going to happen when the cops are the only ones with the gun, Shane? Like, you're the one that complains about...
Right. Actually, the very people that he seeks to speak for, he's, I would argue, speaking against. Yes. So, I mean... Yes, I think there's a behavioral ethic that Christians abide by and should seek to emulate in terms of being peacemakers. But, we do live in a world with evil, and, it would be prudent. I mean, and even in Exodus, the law says that if a person comes into your house and you use violence to, and they die, you're not guilty of their death.
There's something like daylight or like nighttime for that. It's so funny. In one of my Bible studies, we had like different versions of the Bible, and one of them had the daylight nighttime exception. Yeah. One of them said daytime or nighttime. Yeah. And so we're like, oh, Kyle has the NRA Bible.
That's funny, actually.
It was so funny. No, and because like he had the one translation that like didn't have any exception to that.
I've looked into it. I can't remember the exact reason, but there is a good reason for it, and I think the idea is that it's like. I think it's like you can identify if it's in daytime, you can see the person stealing your cattle.
Right.
So it's like then you work it through the authorities. Like, hey, Jim Bob stole my cow, rather than at night. It's like, you don't know who's in your house. It's you have to do what you have to do to protect. But so John Piper, years ago, maybe it was after like a mass shooting, he wrote an article and basically he was like, yeah, if some guy came into my house at night and they were assaulting my wife, I would basically just have to pray for him. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. Ooh. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm telling you, go find it and read it. It's just about like that. It's like basically like I would just have to live with the consequences of somebody like hurting my family because I am so opposed to having guns in the home and things of that nature. So, yeah. There's a lot we didn't get to, and we're out of time. The Libertarian Conference would be fun. Maybe say a word about that. Libertarian Party having a conference. Donald Trump's going to speak. RFK Jr. is going to speak.
Trump and RFK are begging the Libertarians for votes, which I think
that never happens.
No, it never happens. I think it's hilarious. I also am really, really excited to see them push Trump on things like tariffs, to push RFK on things like guns, to push, I'm really excited for this because I'm hoping it will do more damage to Trump and RFK than the credibility of the Libertarian National Convention, which after the Mises Caucus takeover, man, their credibility is in the garbage.
Oh, you don't like the Mises guys?
I like some of the Mises guys, but they are full of a ton of edgelords.
By the way,
that are just insufferable on Twider.
Full of what?
Edgelords.
Oh, what's that?
Really just edgy, like
Okay.
really mean sometimes.
Okay,
like,
okay.
Yeah.
There
Meme makers.
are always like nonconformists who, insist on, I don't know, being the coolest kid around. It gets annoying.
Yeah.
But there was a guy, I can't remember his name, but I think he's high up in the Libertarian Party. He was on Tim Pool's show, and he said, I'm the only abolitionist running for like national politics or something to that effect. In other words, on the abortion issue. And I was like really glad to hear that because as I've talked about on the show in the past, I pointed over there because I sat over there when we talked about this in the past. That was weird that I did that. But when we talked about this issue in the past, it's really disgusting. I think like I don't have any representation for for my understanding of pro-life anywhere in Republican politics. So much less Democrat, obviously.
Right.
So here's a libertarian, and libertarians, of course, are often like whatever.
They're about 50-50, which is really fun because like you have Ron Paul, who is aggressively pro-life.
Yeah.
Right. This like country bumpkin doctor who's the sweetest person. I went and saw him a couple weeks ago.
Oh wow!
Down in South Texas, he is just adorable.
He's like as close as we have to a modern prophet.
You're not kidding.
Yeah.
He's rabidly pro-life.
Yeah.
Same thing with his son, Rand Paul. You've got the Joe Jorgensens who say, I honestly think it's a state issue, like capital punishment is a state issue, right?
Yeah.
So the death penalty, we take matters of life and death state by state.
Yeah.
Some reasonable libertarians say that's kind of how it should be. And then some are just pro-choice.
Yeah.
Some are, so it's really a grab bag of tons of philosophies.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've gone way over time, but that's all right. That was a fun conversation. And with only the two of us, we could talk a lot more. So I guess it was good for our egos or something. I would ask where people can find you, but basically...
I don't want you people knowing where I work.
Yeah.
Like, no.
Theology by the Pint events.
Come to our events.
You'll see Ken. He's a super volunteer. And theologybythepint.org is where to go to like learn how to help us out, help us grow. We want more people at our events. Although we're usually at capacity, but we can always have a few more people. But learn how to give. And Sarah, sorry you couldn't be here. We give you an unexcused absence. You're unexcused, but it is what it is, and we work at your leisure. So that there's that.
And if you don't have a church home, come visit First Lutheran.
Yeah, there you go.
Evan's a nice guy.
I've heard of that place. First Lutheran, flhouston.org. That's where I am. So thanks for listening, and until next time, we encourage you to think deeply, question freely, and disagree as needed.
Peace.